we wanted to touch on some of the things that we thought were really important that have been announced recently and coming out soon. So the three main topics is the Android M release, which hopefully you're all aware of, Google Play Services 7.8, which is the latest version, and then some updates about our Android tools and libraries. And Anka's going to cover the second two. All right, Android M. Oh, can we get any sound? Can we get sound on the laptop? No. Yeah, okay, fine. So, what is Android M? Who knows what Android M is?
Marshmallow.
At Google I/O, before we announced what it was, one of our engineering VPs actually had a special Android Wear watch face that he was wearing during the keynote that would rotate through a variety of M desserts to try and trick people into what we thought that the M release would be named. Okay, it's fun. It's not that good. So, I just wanted to play this video. You probably can't hear it very well.
Maybe martabak or something.
Okay, I won't play this video.
Martabak.
Uh-oh. Okay, sorry, my Wi-Fi has apparently dropped. So. Okay, so all of you already know anyway, so I guess I'm not going to surprise, but Android Marshmallow is the M dessert for this year. Everyone's very, very excited about it. So, like last year, we decided to host a developer preview, like we did the Lollipop. And it's something we announced at Google I/O. We put out images for Nexus devices, Nexus 5, 6, 9, Player, and of course the emulator. And so hopefully some of you have these Nexus devices, but if not, you can use the emulator to start testing on Android M today. And the purpose of this was really so that you could start testing your apps today and get your apps ready for when the M final release comes out. The other really important thing was we wanted to take feedback from you. Feedback about the APIs, about the features, about bugs, crashes, everything. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but we had an issue tracker and a team dedicated to taking feedback from the world about the Android M preview release. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go check it out. Even though M is just around the corner now for consumers, we still really, really want to hear from you about the APIs and the product itself. So this is a bit what the timeline looked like. Around Google I/O, we put out the first developer preview release. We had a second refresh of that with some updated documentation, images, and SDK. And we're in what we call preview 3 stage now, although the final SDK, the final Android 6.0 Marshmallow SDK is actually already released. What does that mean for you? That means you can actually go and publish an Android M targeted app today to Google Play, even though there's no consumer devices out there quite yet. Now, the last piece that's missing here is for consumers to actually receive that push to their devices. And that will happen sometime later this year. I can't tell you when. In terms of getting started, it's really nothing new. For the preview, we actually used a code name for the release called MNC. But now that we've got the final 6.0 SDK, it's just a simple matter of setting your target SDK and your build version to 23, which is the new API level for Android Marshmallow. Okay, so like with every new Android release, there's a few really important changes. And in particular, there's 3 I wanted to talk about today, 3 that I think are probably the most important for you to get out there and start testing with as soon as you can. First is runtime permissions. Second is auto backup. And the last is some power saving optimizations, changes that we put into the operating system. And of course, there's many, many more changes on the behavior front. Some of them are here, but to find out the rest, please just go to the developer site, developer.android.com. All right, so this is the big one. Who has heard of the new runtime permissions model? Oh, good. Oh, okay, good, perfect. Hopefully everyone's going to learn something today. So Android has had the same permissions model since the very first version, Android 1.0. There's been no real significant changes to how that permission system works. And now it's been completely revamped in Android N. It's really quite a significantly different behavior, and that means you really need to go and start testing your apps on it as soon as you get the chance. Now the good thing is, this new behavior only starts when you set the target SDK of your application to that new API level 23 or above. If you don't, you get the old behavior. So hopefully it shouldn't break anything you currently have. Now, what are the differences? Well, the first one is, when the user goes to Google Play and presses install, there is now no more dialog that shows you all the permissions that this app has in order to install. This means that there's less friction to install the app. Likewise, app updates are always automatic. Well, I should clarify, they're always automatic unless users manually toggle it off, but permissions cannot influence how those app updates change. And the last thing is that now the user has fine-grained revocable permissions. So the user can go in and choose exactly which permissions that they can turn on and off for that particular application. So how does this work? Well, when the user first starts your app, at runtime, you'll have the opportunity to call our APIs that ask the user if they want to grant permission to your app for a specific permission. And I'll show you an example in just a second. Now, it is a little bit complicated how the behavior works because we've changed it so significantly, but we wanted to maintain backward compatibility. So there's this kind of pretty complicated matrix that I've put up here. Hopefully you can understand it. Now, if the user's on a device before Marshmallow, the lollipop or earlier, nothing's really going to change to them. It's the same behavior as always. Likewise, if your target SDK is earlier than Marshmallow, so lollipop or earlier, nothing is going to change in install time either. Now, if the user's on an M device, but your target SDK is an earlier version of Android than Marshmallow, then the user still sees that install time permission dialog. But the user can manually go in and revoke some of the permissions. So you still need to prepare for that to happen. And then lastly, the bottom right segment, and this is the completely new behavior that you're going to see going forward, is if they're on an M device and targeting M or above. Here they won't see the dialog on install. There's no permissions granted initially, and the app has to request the permissions one by one at one time. Now there's a long list of permissions in Android. But what we've gone and done is categorize those permissions into these 9 buckets. So for example, read contacts and write contacts fall into the contacts bucket. So each one of these will have multiple permissions that come from your manifest associated with it. This is because we didn't want users to be overwhelmed with 50 different types of permissions. We wanted them to be easy and understandable for users. Now, in terms of best practices, only ask for what you need. It seems kind of obvious. But the key here is only when you need it. So if you're a photography app, you're probably always going to need the camera permission. So you might want to grab that immediately on startup. But if you're say a food blogging app, you may not always need that camera permission. So you can request it just at the point where the user starts the camera to take a photo. Now there's 9 new permission buckets here. You also don't want to overwhelm the user. You don't want to ask the user for 9 permissions right at the beginning when they start the app. Obviously you want to reduce the number of those that you use, but even better, you want to space them out across the app so that the user only gets presented with them when you need that permission. Android's always had this very flexible intent system. For example, you can call out to the camera without actually having the camera permission and get a photo back from it. So the alternative here is, instead of requesting the camera permission from the user, you can actually just call out to the intent as well. The last one is to explain why you need permissions, and I'll show you an example of that in just a second. This is kind of what it looks like. I'll actually try and show you a demo, and this is going to use the regular Android emulator, not Genuine. So it's good. And of course, the emulator is shut down while I've been speaking. This will take about 20 minutes. Yeah, while that's going, I'll look into the projector. Okay, so while the emulator is loading, if it does load, I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the Hangouts app, the Google Hangouts app, and it's asking if the user wants to manage phone calls. And the user has two options, allow or deny. There's also an additional checkbox that says don't ask again. That only shows up the second time you ask the user for that permission. So they have the option to sort of block your app from ever asking again. Yeah, let's see what you guys think. Is it ready? And this is what the user sees in the system settings now. So they actually have two views to encapsulate how the permissions are set up on their device. So on the left, you see one specific application and the permissions that it holds. In this case, it's WhatsApp. So it has 6 permissions here, and they're all enabled. The user can at any time go in and disable any one of those or all of those permissions. On the right side, you actually see the camera permission and all the apps that hold that permission. So the user can also see each permission and then go and toggle that they're enabled for each app. Now it's going to be ready, right? Yeah. No, I have to do this. So this is a pretty boring demo, I have to give you a heads up. It's just some permission dialogues, but I thought it would be interesting just to see how it works. Okay, so very simple. If I want to request location permission, I can click this button. Pretty straightforward. Now, if I click deny, and then I try it again, you'll see this time it's got this never ask again button. Click that. Now when I click this, it doesn't prompt with the system dialog anymore, so the user can't debug to enable that permission again. And you can also request multiple permissions in one go. So that looks something like this. Allow my sample to access your contacts. And down the bottom it's got a little 1 of 2. And obviously this can go all the way up to 1 of 9, but you probably wouldn't want to do that. And so again, I have full control here. I can say yes or no, I'll say deny. And then the second one comes in and it's asking, do you want my sample to access this sensor data? I'll say allow. Now you can go into system settings. And this is what the final state for those permissions looks like. I allowed access to body sensors, but not these other 3 permissions. So of course I can just go and change them on and off if I want, or I can block them all if I want as well. So your app really needs to be prepared for all of these kinds of scenarios. Okay, so in terms of actual implementation, it's pretty straightforward. It's really the sort of design and UX and how you integrate it with your app's flow that's more difficult. So this is what the new methods look like. There's one called check self permission that checks if a particular permission is available or not, has been granted to your application. There's one called request permissions that you can give a single permission or a list of permissions to, and request that system dialog shows up to ask the user to enable those permissions. And then there's a callback from request permissions called onRequest permission results, which tells you what happens to that request. Did they say yes? Did they say no? We've also added a compat version, a compatibility version in the support library, version 23, that you can use. It has identical methods that you can call, on context compat and activity compat. This just allows you to call on so that it runs across all versions of Android. Although, of course, the new permissions model only takes effect on Marshmallow.
Oh.
That's some very quick code for how it looks. In this case, the best practice is to check if I already hold a particular permission. This is the access find location permission. And if I don't currently, if I'm not currently granted that permission, I'm going to go ahead and request the permission using the request permissions method. And then asynchronously, I'll get this callback on request permissions results. And it'll have a list of the permissions I requested and if they were granted or not. Now, there's one last method that you should be aware of, and it's a bit of a long one. It's called should show request permission rationale. Quite a mouthful.
Ini yang ngasih
It's really obvious what it does, right?
dia bilangnya kita lebih
So what this does
kalau itu tadi
is it returns true if you should try and convince the user that they should try and enable that permission. And the main use case for this is if the user has blocked that permission, if they checked that box and said, I don't want to give this app that permission anymore. You've got one last chance by showing some of your own UI to convince the user to go and change that. So you get notified that the user's blocked you from asking for that permission. On the right here, we see an example from Google Maps. And this isn't actually live right now, this is just an example. But it's a dialogue that they put up at the bottom of the screen that says, please, please, give me that permission. Like, let me try and enable that permission. Okay, so that's permissions. Pretty straightforward.
right
Yeah?
let's go
Can't tell if you're being serious or not. Yeah. The second big behavior change is auto backup for apps. So they've actually had a backup system in Android for quite a while, but it's been significantly updated or upgraded in Android and Marshmallow. We offer free and automatic app backup of the data on the device, up to 25 megabytes per user per app. And it actually occurs, it tries to happen once every 24 hours when the device is charging, when the device is in a good network state. So when it's on Wi-Fi that's unmetered and has a solid connection. This will actually be enabled for all apps that target Android M or above by default. Although for the preview, it was enabled for all apps that run on in preview, just so that people could test. In terms of implementation, there's actually nothing that you need to do. However, we do recommend following our best practices. So using things like get files there, get external files there to write all of your data for your application. Directories like get external cache dir and get cache dir will not be backed up. They're cache directories. But get external files there and get files there will be backed up automatically. The only thing you need to be aware of is you need to make sure you exclude any device-specific identifiers. So maybe that's a GCM ID, maybe if it's a security token or something like that, you need to make sure that that's not backed up and that you correctly restore from the statement that the rest of your data is restored. We do offer some configuration if you want to have more control. So in your Android manifest, in the application component, you can actually specify a custom XML that lets you choose which files, which databases, which preferences are backed up or not backed up accordingly. We have a way for you to test this on your device that's running the Android M preview. You can use these ADB commands to basically trigger a backup and trigger a restore to see that everything's working accordingly. The best thing about this is the great user experience. We've been playing with this ourselves. You get a brand new device, you install all those apps, they can all be logged in already. They can restore all of your data that is stored on the device already, all without you having to do anything, and all with the data storage being taken care of by Google. Okay, and then the last major change that I want to talk about were some new power-saving optimizations that we put into Android M. There's two initiatives. One is called Doze, one is called App Standby. So I'll talk a little bit about them. But the goal of Doze is really to increase the standby time of devices that haven't been used for a little while. So it could be your phone sitting on the table for a bit. It could be that tablet at home that's sitting on your puffy table while you're at work. And the second one is App Standby. And the goal of that is to reduce the overhead of apps that haven't been used in a while, that the users are not using. So they may have installed 50 apps and they haven't touched them in months. And we don't want those apps to have a significant battery impact on the device. Okay, so Doze mode. When a device goes into Doze mode, we detect if it hasn't been used for quite a while. And network access becomes disabled. Everything except for high priority GCM messages. Even wake locks are ignored. The only thing that will get through it other than GCM is something called set alarm clock and set and allow while idle, which are new APIs in Android M. Even background syncs, data syncs, job schedulers, jobs will not run. Again, we've enabled some GDG commands. You can actually go and test with this. So I encourage you to give it a go. Of course, once the user picks up their device and we detect movement, it turns it on and unlocks it, the device springs back into its regular state again. And just to talk about the impact this has, we see a device like a Nexus 9 tablet can last in Doze mode for up to 30 days or more without ever being charged during that period. So it's pretty effective. The second power saving optimization is App Standby. Now, if the app has been installed on the device and hasn't been launched by the user, and hasn't had a foreground process, and no notifications, the app can go into the standby mode. And we don't define the period that it takes to go into standby mode, but after a certain period of time, the app will be classified as in standby mode. And again, it has some restrictions applied to it. So in this case, network access is disabled, and sync and background drops are also disabled. Now, as soon as the user gets a GCM message, a notification, the user goes to the launcher and starts it, that app gets removed from App Standby. So again, it's really just something that you need to be aware of. You may want to test to see how it performs when your app goes into the state. Now, there's many new features in the Android M platform. There's things like direct share and a new fingerprint API. We have app linking now, and some new text selection APIs, and so much more. But as I mentioned, we probably won't have time to go through this today, but I encourage you to go to the developer site and check it out. Now, one last section before I hand over to Anchor. I had a few small additions that I just personally like to pull out from the platform. These are things that you probably won't find on the developer site. They're just really small, interesting things that I sort of wanted to mention. One of them is this new attribute in the theme called window light status bar. If you set this to true, we have a new mode in Android Marshmallow where we'll actually invert the system status icons to a dark color, so you can have a light color, a lighter color in your material theme. It's pretty cool.
Nah, itu kan kalau kayak
The
gitu
other one
jadi nggak
is
enak kan?
a new foreground attribute, and
Kalau itu kan
what you're
putih-putih
seeing
gitu nggak
here
enak.
is
Kalau
touch
hitam
feedback when you
kayak
touch these sort of photos that shows in the foreground. This is actually quite tricky to implement correctly before Android M. I'll show you how to implement it.
apa itu? Ripple.
So before Android M, you actually had to wrap that layout in a frame layout.
Yeah.
And you had to set the foreground drawable on the frame layout because that attribute is only available in a frame layout. From Android M onwards, all views and view groups have their own Android foreground attribute. You can put any drawable selector directly on the foreground of the view. Might seem like a very small change, but just really nice addition to the view APIs we already have. The unfortunate thing is, this is not part of the support library. This only works with Android M onwards. So it won't save you right now.
No?
Iya, jadi dia apa?
Here's another really small
Disupport
addition
ke
that I like a lot.
turun juga,
The
kompas.
notifications front.
Aku mau nanyain masalah
So there's a new
activity
class called
transition sama
Android.graphics
video
called
animation
icon,
itu bisa
and some new
video
APIs called
animation
Create with
preparation
Bitmap.
itu bisa.
Now, I don't know if you
Kan itu
have played with this
Nggak bisa.
yourself, but
Cuman ada
before it
yang
was
buat
actually
ada
impossible
yang
to
buat
set
itu
a
dari
dynamic bitmap as an icon for a
sama.
notification. You can actually go and pull it from your resources folder. So what does this mean for something like you see down the bottom right there? And then you had to have 10 icons, or 20 icons in this case, in your drawable folder. And if you wanted to have a smoothly graduated battery power bar, you would have had to have 100 icons. But now that it's a bitmap, you can actually dynamically generate that icon on the fly and then publish it out as an icon for that notification. Like again, a very small thing, but quite nice, right?
Like a
And there's also a new API, a new method called Get Active Notifications, which actually lets you get your app's active notifications from the notification drawer. You might be thinking, that's strange, you must have been able to do that before, but you actually couldn't. You can't do that. So it's an API that was just missing before, and now it's available for you to use. And as I mentioned, there's many more things that are just really interesting that I highly encourage you to go play with and check out. I personally love the new text selection API that we're building, but there's also some great things around fingerprints, voice interactions, some more niche things like MIDI and 4K display, and a lot more. All right, let me pass you over to Anka, who's going to cover Google Play Services. And
Thank you, Adam. Hi everyone, I'm Anka. I'm also a developer advocate and I work with Adam in the Sydney office. I'm really excited to be here today and I'm going to talk to you about two main high-level areas, Play Services and some of the Android tools and libraries. So let's get started with Play Services. You asked a really good question earlier about indoor location. And so I wanted to just tell you about our solutions there. We have two things. One is beacons and the other is nearby. And so the idea behind this is beacons kind of give you the location part of it, but often we found there were use cases where people were getting location needing to communicate with other devices. And so beacons kind of help us, and this is a long-term strategy, right? Like you need to have the beacons available in all these locations so that they can start to show up on Google Maps. But as those start to come online, if you're using the Maps API, the Place Pickup will already show the beacons, show the location based on beacons that are already built. So if you go to our developer.google.com portal and check out the Eddystone beacon standard, you can learn a bit more. In terms of nearby messages, someone mentioned earlier that nearby is something that you've been interested in. It's a great way to basically discover devices that are in close proximity, typically in the same room. And now we've got a messages API which allows you to communicate with those devices. So examples of where you might have seen this is in play game services. When you're trying to find other people to play with, we actually use the nearby APIs, our own APIs, to matchmake. To say, hey, Adam and I can play that game on our Android TV together. But it is cross-platform. And what that also means is now you can start to discover all sorts of interesting content. One of my favorite podcast applications, Pocket Casts, recently published an update such that with my app I could fire it up, and anyone else that's around me that's also has Pocket Casts can see the podcasts that I've subscribed to. So no longer do I have to do that kind of annoying thing of like hit the share button, copy the URL, send it via my favorite instant messenger. It's all built in and really nice to use. And it's important that it's unauthenticated, so it's literally that proximity. You don't have to have a Google account to do it. And being able to exchange that sort of information via Android and iOS makes it really good. I even wore the same T-shirt as this. So we have this new thing called a Vision API, and let me give you some background behind the photo. We had a team event, and we were just posing for a photo. I didn't know it was a competition. I didn't know that I'd get graded on my smile months later. And here we are, and the Vision API kind of enables this. So what this API does is allows you to take photos. It will recognize that these pictures are faces, and it's able to do things like tell you what, and it might be a little bit hard to see, tell you what kind of smile each of these people has. And just in case you can't tell, I have the highest rated smile in this photo. But actually, we do some really interesting things. We put tell you where the eyes are, where the nose is, where the mouth is. And so we're actually able to, through this API, do face activity recognition. So you can tell if a person's smiling, frowning, they're just sort of apathetic. We can even tell you things like sort of what angle the head is facing. So it's a really great way to sort of discover faces in images. And we don't have that image here, but we have if you go to our documentation page, you'll see we've got pictures of people with animals, and we're not recognizing the animals. Basically, their smile scores are too low. One of the things that I'm sure many of us do is we sign in to the web through our favorite browser, then we go to our mobile apps and we sign in again, and then if we have a phone or a tablet, we do it again and again. It's really, really annoying, right? Chrome has had this great feature for password syncing. So if you have a laptop and a desktop, it will sync your passwords across those browsers. And now we're extending that through something called Smart Lock for passwords. So if you go to your favorite websites, you sign in with them, and that user stores those credentials, you can, in your app, retrieve those credentials so that they can automatically sign in without having to punch in a complex password on a mobile keyboard. And so we call that the Credentials API, and basically your app can go and save a set of credentials or request a set of stored credentials. And so the package name for that is it's within Play Services. So it's really worth checking out if you have authentication using your own accounts. Many of you probably use things like Google Sign In or Facebook Sign In anyway, but for those users that can have their own usernames and passwords, this is a nice way to reduce that sign-up friction. It's also a common request that developers say to us, hey, we need to get an identifier for our installations. And in the past, we've